Just before I left for my trip, I met up with my brother and nephew. My brother gave me this National Geographic road atlas for the trip. It was an adventure edition that had a ton of useful information about all the national parks. It turned out to be a huge help. It led me to a couple of places I would have never thought to go otherwise. One was Death Valley, which was one of the most amazing places I have ever seen. Whenever I see or think of Death Valley in California, it reminds me of Psalm 23. In the King James Version of Psalm 23, it begins with, "The Lord is my shepherd, I shall not want." And later, in the fourth verse, it has the line, "Yea, though I walk through the valley of the shadow of death, I will fear no evil, for thou art with me." It also reminds me of Clemson University in South Carolina, where I went to undergrad, and Louisiana State University in Baton Rouge, Louisiana, where I got my MBA at night school. Both the Clemson and LSU football stadiums are nicknamed Death Valley. Clemson's football stadium even has a rock called Howard's Rock that came from Death Valley in California. Before every home game, the Clemson football players rub Howard's Rock for luck and to show their commitment to doing their best. And then they run down the hill onto the playing field. On October 17th, 2022, a Monday, I packed everything up and set out on my trip. I'd taken a while to prepare for the trip and to figure out how to fit what I wanted into the car, but this was my first time actually packing everything into the car. Fortunately, everything fit okay. It was a little tighter than I'd hoped, which would make car camping a little tougher. I'd have to pile some stuff up on the driver's seat to get enough room to sleep in the back, but I could make it work. I left just a few things with my parents. I left a few boxes of photographs, books, and memorabilia. I left a couple of suits and a few collared shirts my brother had given me for Christmas one year. I left my electric guitar and amp. At the last minute, I realized I had a bunch of odds and ends that I hadn't packed, but didn't want to leave with my parents. Some old electronics, extra cords, and just a bunch of random stuff. I couldn't decide whether to keep it or throw it away, so I just punted. I threw it all in a duffel bag and just tossed it in the car. I could figure out what to do with it later. And with that, I drove off. This bird has flown. My first stop? Oak Island, North Carolina. I decided the best way to kick off a trip out to the West Coast was to make a quick trip to touch the East Coast. From coast to coast, from sea to shining sea. Soon, I would see sunsets over the Pacific Ocean and baptize myself in its waters. first, I wanted to see a sun rise over the Atlantic Ocean and baptize myself in its waters, a dawning of a new adventure. I got to Oak Island at night. My friend Chris owns a house over there that he rents out through Airbnb. He kindly let me stay there. Thanks, Chris. That night, I went out to the beach, waded into the ocean, and immersed myself in the waters of the Atlantic. The water temperature was around 72 degrees Fahrenheit that day, or about 22 degrees Celsius. And that night it was probably closer to the low of 70 degrees Fahrenheit, or 21 degrees Celsius. It felt cool and brisk. But that's warm bathwater compared to the Pacific Ocean along the U.S. coast, where the currents bring water from Alaska, and the temperatures in October run around a chilly 65 degrees Fahrenheit, or about 18 degrees Celsius in San Diego, to around a frigid 55 degrees Fahrenheit, or about 13 degrees Celsius near Seattle, Washington. The next morning, I got up at dawn and I watched the sunrise over the Atlantic Ocean. Such a gorgeous sight. Oak Island sits about 30 miles south of Wilmington, North Carolina, and Oak Island sits at the mouth of the Cape Fear River, where the Cape Fear flows into the Atlantic Ocean. I loved the idea of starting my trip at Cape Fear, near the mouth of the Cape Fear River. For me, it was like staring fear into the face and diving in. And that's part of what I wanted to do. I had visited Oak Island back in June of 2018, and something from that visit had stuck in my mind ever since. It was early in my recovery, and I hadn't gotten completely sober yet. I was making progress, but stable and firm sobriety was still to come. I visited a bar in Oak Island. I talked to the bartender there, and he mentioned that Will Smith had a great story about skydiving I could find on YouTube. That Will Smith story has become a favorite of mine. He tells it better than me, so I'll post a link of him telling it on YouTube. But I will give a quick summary here. Will and his friends go out one night and decide they're going to go skydiving. When he's out with his friends, everything sounds exciting and fun. But when he gets home, he starts to get a little anxious. And when the day to skydive rolls around, he grows even more fearful. And when the door to the plane opens up for people to jump out, the fear hits him even harder. And when his experienced tandem skydiving partner throws both their bodies out of the plane, at first, he's terrified. But then, suddenly, he looks out and he sees he's flying. And he's just amazed by the awesomeness of the experience. And he concludes with this: your joy is behind your fear. That really resonates with me. Now, I'm writing and recording this after Will Smith slapped Chris Rock at the Academy Awards over a joke about Jada Pinkett Smith. So, I will just say here that I don't condone everything Will Smith does, and I don't condone everything Chris Rock does. I choose to have compassion for Will Smith, Jada Pinkett Smith, and Chris Rock. I choose to love and accept them all as fellow human beings. And I choose gratitude for the life experience and wisdom they all have to offer. And for me personally, that skydiving story has been a strong piece of wisdom that I've been very grateful for. That very human struggle with fear has been one of the dominant themes in my life so far. I remember back around 2014 or 2015, not too long after I got divorced and moved into an apartment in Haverhill, Massachusetts, north of Boston, I started doing yoga at a small yoga studio just around the corner from my apartment. I remember at the end of one session, the teacher had us lay flat down on our backs and meditate by candlelight. While I laid there, I had this experience. I'm not really sure what to call it. A vision? Maybe I dozed off for a minute and had a vivid dream. Maybe I just had a vivid waking dream. Whatever it was, I saw this version of myself. I barely recognized this version of myself. He had long hair and a ponytail. I'd had short hair my entire life. I couldn't imagine having long hair. And he was muscular and lean. I mean, I could see this guy's abs. I hadn't seen mine in over 20 years because they were hiding behind a layer of fat and flab. He was shirtless and wearing loose white pants, like karate pants, and there were two dragons flying around him in circles. One dragon was white with black and gold markings, and the other dragon was black with white markings. Each dragon looked like a Chinese conception of a dragon. Big head like a lion, long snake-like body, and tiny arms and legs like a little T-Rex. The white dragon glowed with this warm, luminescent, almost divine light. The black dragon had this eerie, shadowy, bluish-black glow. The dragons moved around this version of me in a circle, almost like the Taoist yin-yang symbol, with each head snapping near the other's tail. As they circled this weird version of me, he concentrated his gaze on them and made these hand gestures that seemed to either manipulate them or keep them at bay. And as I watched this, I realized that the white dragon was love, and the black dragon was fear. And this version of me was at the center of this struggle between fear and love. And as this epiphany hit me, snapped awake and bolt upright in the yoga studio. But everything there was normal, like none of it had ever happened outside my own mind. And after that, slowly but surely, I started to notice this tug-of-war between love and fear playing out in my life. In recovery, this battle became even more clear. In the fourth step of the 12 steps, we make what we call a searching and fearless moral inventory of ourselves. The words of the step itself even allude to fear. Like many of us, I procrastinated even doing much on this step for several months because I was so afraid of it. Fortunately, after months of dilly-dallying, I finally just sat down and did the step one day. And it only took a day or two to actually do the step. Months to procrastinate, a day or two to actually do. The tools I used for the fourth step are the ones used by lots of people in 12-step fellowships. I started with some worksheets. One worksheet asked me to list all the people and things I resented, basically anyone or anything I held onto a grudge or anger about. Another worksheet asked me to list all of my fears. I find that fascinating. Of the core, basic human emotions, joy, sadness, anger, and fear, or in even simpler rhyming terms, mostly rhyming terms, glad, sad, mad, and scared. Anger and fear seem to trip so many people up that they play a central role in virtually everyone's fourth step inventory and everyone's recovery. Maybe it speaks to the power of these particular emotions. Anger can provide powerful energy for change. And in some ways, anger is just a natural part of the human experience. One AA mantra says that, in order to forgive, I must first feel my anger. But if I don't process anger in a healthy way, it can turn toxic. Another AA mantra states that holding on to anger is like drinking poison and expecting the other person to die. That's resentment, holding on to anger. Pure poison for me. Fear can be just as powerful and just as dangerous. In its healthiest form, fear just helps us respond to real survival threats by sparking the fight, flight, or freeze response in our bodies. But fear can also result from things we perceive as a threat, even when the threat exists more in our minds than in reality. And this fear created by the mind can lead to chronic anxiety, chronic health problems, and can fuel all kinds of destructive insanity in my life. By the time I had finished my first pass at step 4, I saw how much fear fueled every bad habit, every character defect, every unhealthy coping mechanism. All of it had been fueled by fear. Drinking and other bad habits, just an attempt to avoid facing my real problems because I was afraid of them. Poor anger management. Underneath anger, I usually find fear. After all, anger is basically the fight in the fight, flight, or freeze response to a perceived threat. Avoiding conflict, passive-aggressive behaviors, fear of facing conflict in a healthy way, fear of rejection, fear of failure. Procrastination, fear of doing something because it might be hard, or I might fail, or my effort might not somehow be good enough. When I did my fear inventory, I ended up seeing some of my biggest fears in black and white. Fear of embarrassment, fear of rejection, fear of failure, fear of being abandoned or being alone. But even more importantly, I saw how all these fears tied together. And how, like the branches of some poisonous tree, all the branches came down to 2 trunks that merged into one at the bottom. The 2 trunks, fear that I was somehow not good enough, and fear that I would not or could not be loved. And at the base, the merged trunk, just fear that I was somehow not good enough. After all, why would no one love me? Because I was not good enough. For a while, this powerful revelation blew my mind. But then at some point I came to realize that I'm not especially creative or unique with my fears. I'm just human. And fear is part of the human experience. Tony Robbins once said that all human beings' fears boil down to two basic things: fear of not being loved and fear of somehow not being good enough. Tony does a lot of sales, so I can be a little skeptical of some of the things he says, but I think he nailed it on that one. I've found it powerfully true for myself, and the more I get to know other people more deeply, the more I see it as powerfully true for a lot of us, maybe even all of us. I'm not the first person by any stretch to notice this struggle in life between love and fear. John Lennon wrote about it. He said there were two basic motivating forces in life: fear and love. When we fear, we pull back from life. When we love, we open to all life has to offer. Mahatma Gandhi said that fear and love are contradictory terms, and he said that power can either be based on fear of punishment or acts of love, with power based on love 1,000 times more effective and permanent than power derived from fear. The first epistle of John discussed it about nearly 2,000 years ago. In the 4th chapter, it says, "There is no fear in love, but perfect love drives out fear. The one who fears is not made perfect in love." And in the same paragraph of the same letter, John also wrote, simply and powerfully, God is love. With all that in mind, I came to view this trip as part of my lifelong struggle between love and fear. A part of me would like this process to be easy, turning on love like a lamp and turning off fear like a light switch. Done forever. But part of me accepts that this struggle between love and fear is just a lifelong struggle for me. I won't defeat fear forever and bask in eternal perfect love overnight. Not in this lifetime. But I can at least show up every day and do my best, one day at a time. And this trip, for me, came to represent one important step forward into the face of fear, through fear, and to the love and joy on the other side of fear. In preparing for the trip, the last episode, I had come to a place where I could accept my past and let it go. Maybe not all at once, but at least gradually more and more. To do that, I needed to spend some time in the past, a place where I sometimes struggle with sadness and regret. Now it was time to face forward, and that meant stepping into the present with my eyes open toward an uncertain future, the unknown, a place where I sometimes struggle with fear. But in the face of fear, I know I can find courage. Just like in the face of my many resentments, I learned to find forgiveness. That resentment list became my prayer list. I learned that from my 12-step fellowships. And they picked that up from this very compassionate guy who lived around 2,000 years ago. Jesus, the Sermon on the Mount, Matthew 5, love your enemies and pray for them, even if they aren't sorry. It's funny how I heard that a million times growing up in church, but never once thought to actually do it until I got into recovery. Even more funny, it actually works. It took time and a lot of repetition, but it worked. Whether they deserve it or not, I deserve the peace and serenity that comes with forgiving them. And if I can learn to forgive and love the people who hurt me, maybe I can learn courage in the face of fear too. However long it takes, one day at a time. Courage and forgiveness are just two of the many faces, the many facets of love. One of Oak Island's most famous features is the Oak Island Lighthouse. It's on Oak Island, but it's technically in the town of Caswell Beach. Built in 1957 and finished in 1958, it's a tall, thin tower of concrete, painted black at the top third, white in the middle third, and concrete gray at the bottom third. It has a distinctive and unique look among the lighthouses I've seen in person. There's something beautiful and even romantic about a lighthouse that I love. A light in the darkness, a beacon guiding sailors to safety through difficult waters. In my lifelong struggle between fear and love, fear is that darkness, and that lighthouse represents the love trying to guide me along my life's path to a better place. That vision I had about two dragons circling a better version of me reminds me of a story one of my friends at the gym told me. I'll call him David here. David and I had been going to the same gym for a while, and eventually we got to talking and realized we were both in recovery. And once he saw that, he gave me a part of his recovery story that I'd like to share with you. David was doing some work under a house one day. The work frustrated him. He got really flustered, and then he accidentally banged his head on one of the beams under the house. The minute he hit his head, all his brain fog cleared, and he immediately thought, I need to visit my grandmother. And he thought for a minute and realized he really did want to visit his grandmother. Not to get anything from her, just to spend time with her. He hardly ever did that, and now was the time. He went over to his grandmother's house, and they ended up sitting and talking while they were swinging in her porch swing. And David asked his grandmother, what's it all about? This life, it's so frustrating, so confusing. What's the point of all this? And his grandmother just smiles and says, simply, David, it's all about love. And when he hears that, David has an experience. He described it as if it were an out-of-body experience almost. He was just suddenly hanging out in deep outer space, nothing but a black void all around him. And in front of him, there is a golden ring. The ring is moving around and around, spinning around, and slowly but surely getting smaller and smaller. Then he remembers someone saying to him when he was a kid, in this life, we get a lot of chances to choose the right path, but this lifetime will not last forever, and that opportunity to choose will eventually close. Then he looked at this spinning golden ring, tightening into a smaller circle, and realized that ring represented his window of opportunity to choose. Just as that circle started to close, he reached out and grabbed the ring. The moment he grabbed that ring, bam! He's back in that swing with his grandmother, and she's just smiling sweetly. David, it's about love. And then he gets it. Life, the universe, everything. It's all about love. After that, David gets more serious about recovery, gets more sober, and now he has what he really needed, a lighthouse to guide him through darkness and treacherous waters. A simple lighthouse. Love. The critical philosophical questions of the purpose of life, why are we here, things philosophers and poets and priests and scientists have struggled with for thousands of years, and David's grandmother just slapped it down like it was nothing, like it was a pan out of the oven with freshly baked chocolate chip cookies. Grandmothers can be awesome like that. A simple lighthouse. Love. But simple does not mean easy. And sometimes it does get hard and complicated. How do you love and forgive yourself when you've done something bad? How do you love and forgive someone else who's hurt you? How do you love a verbally abusive alcoholic spouse? How do you love an emotionally manipulative, drug-addicted child? But that difficulty and complication is why we have all these diverse human lives to explore. It's all about love, even when it gets messy, complicated, and hard. the lighthouse, a beacon of hope, love. In some ways, I need that lighthouse to guide me. And in some ways, I aspire to be that lighthouse for others. Many times in my life, the love for my friends, family, and even God, the universe itself, whatever you want to call it, has been that lighthouse guiding me to a better place. Even though I walk through the valley of the shadow of death, I need not fear, because I am not alone. You are with me. May I also return the favor to the universe by providing love and hope to others. And may you also become more and more free of fear. I am with you. In recovery, I had many teachers, from sponsors and recovery friends to meditation and even religious teachers. One of them taught me that fear is an acronym for false evidence appearing real. And you know what else I discovered when I did my fourth step inventory? When I wrote down all those fears and saw them in black and white, when I talked about them with my sponsor, they're insane. Purely distorted thinking. Who in this world is truly unlovable? Who in this world is truly a complete and utter failure? In the dark, shadowy corners of my mind, these thoughts terrified me. They haunted me like ghosts, nightmares. But once the light shines on them, once I write them down, once I confess them to myself, to another person I trust, and to God or whatever you want to call some higher power, then I can see them more clearly for what they really are. Lies. Another one of my teachers taught me to use this mantra. Fear is an illusion. My light is truth. It's a powerful mantra, but one I need to repeat all the time to rewire my brain into more sane thinking. Something else most of us do in our fourth step inventory is to list our character virtues, our assets, our healthy coping mechanisms, or whatever you want to call them. And that can be hard for some of us who lean towards self-shaming. But even if we need a little help, we can usually see that they are there. They might be small, or weak, or underdeveloped, or pop up only infrequently, but at least the seeds are there. And even if we don't quite believe they are there yet, or we just can't see them, we can just list them as something we aspire to, something we want more and more of as part of a gradual process of improvement, of our spiritual awakening. Progress, not perfection. Sometimes quickly, sometimes slowly. And when I did my inventory, I realized that all my virtues, all my strengths, they were all fueled by love. In a state of fear, I became a bundle of character defects, bad habits, and unhealthy coping mechanisms. But in a state of love, I could act out of virtue, out of strength, out of compassion, and I could actually manage to employ some healthy coping mechanisms. And for me, that's a lifelong struggle toward improvement. May I learn to shine my light brighter and brighter for myself and others. Thank you for watching and listening. If you're family, I want you to know that I love you. If you're one of my friends, I want you to know that I love you. If we've met, but you don't consider me a friend or part of your family, even if you consider me an enemy, I want you to know that I love you too. And if we've never met, but you're still a fellow human being, I want you to know that I love you too. Fear is an illusion. My light is truth. Your light is truth. Love and light to you today and every day that you walk this earth.